Will America be a third world country in 20 years? That was the question that economist and syndicated commentator Paul Craig Roberts asked at the conclusion of one of his columns last year. Will America be a third world country in 20 years? Now, what caused Mr. Roberts, who is a former associate editor of the Wall Street Journal and former assistant secretary of the U.S. Treasury, to ask a question like that, which many people would seem to think is quite bizarre? The United States, a third world country? Nonsense. Preposterous, you say. Everyone knows that the USA is the only global superpower. We're the biggest economy, we're the technology capital of the world, we're the capital of the world. But there is something very wrong with that rosy picture. America, the great, the rich, the powerful, is headed for a devastating fall. And if we continue on our present path, it is not at all sensationalist to speculate that within just 20 years, the United States, one of the most powerful and prosperous and free nations in history, could be reduced to third world status. Outrageous? Yes. But outrageous in the sense that it accurately describes an outrageous truth. And Paul Craig Roberts is far from the only one mentioning it. So I ask you to ponder this very seriously. Consider what a terrible tragedy, in fact, what an unconscionable crime it would be for America to sink to such a wretched state. Is that the legacy we will leave to our children and our children's children? We who have been the beneficiaries of countless blessings due to the labors and sacrifices of earlier generations. We who have enjoyed comforts and prosperity and luxuries undreamt of by the vast majority of peoples throughout the entire history of the world. Yes, it is happening. That is where we are headed. And it is happening because we, the citizens and consumers of America, are not only allowing it to happen, but we are actually aiding and abetting, both by our actions and inaction, this precipitous decline. It is happening because we are allowing elected and appointed leaders to enact legislation and carry out policies that are patently suicidal for America. We are allowing, for instance, the destructive immigration and trade policies that caused Mr. Roberts to ask that bleak question, will America be a third world country in 20 years? His speculation about our national meltdown came at the conclusion of a column in which he surveyed some very bitter facts and alarming trends concerning the loss of millions of American jobs. Millions of U.S. citizens have already lost their jobs, and millions more are slated to lose theirs due to the combination of massive legal and illegal immigration and the simultaneous outsourcing of jobs overseas. That's what we're going to be looking at in the next hour. The deadly combination of immigration and trade and regulatory policies and laws that are responsible not only for the loss of millions of jobs, but just as importantly for the loss of hundreds of thousands of businesses and whole industries that have left or are in the process of leaving America. Businesses and industries and technologies that are essential to our economy and to our way of life, and that are also essential to our national defense and our national security. But first, let's examine the jobs picture. If we look across the entire jobs spectrum, from blue collar to white collar, from low tech to high tech, Americans are getting the pink slip. In the cases of jobs in manufacturing, construction, textiles, agriculture, and other manual labor jobs, the pattern has been that these Americans are replaced by illegal aliens from Latin America or Asia, or their jobs are moved lock, stock, and barrel to entirely new facilities in China, in Mexico, Malaysia, India, or other foreign countries. U.S. high-tech workers and white-collar office personnel, on the other hand, are more likely to be given the boot and replaced by legal aliens who are being admitted into this country by the hundreds of thousands under the H-1B, the H-2B, and L-1 visa programs. Or they are being replaced by foreign workers overseas as companies outsource jobs to India, China, Pakistan, Romania, Russia, and elsewhere. It is not just jobs that are being lost. It is not just employees that are being hurt. Hundreds of thousands of businesses, from small mom-and-pop stores and shops to family farms and large manufacturers, are being forced out of business. Many independent family businesses that were built over several generations that provided jobs and services to their communities have been driven from extinction by government regulation, by mandates and taxation. All of these socialistic policies drive up the costs and make American products uncompetitive. They make them uncompetitive price-wise against foreign products that receive favorable trade treatment, and this is the key point, even subsidies from our government. Yes, that's right. For the past 3 decades, the United States government has subsidized to the tune of tens of billions of dollars the wholesale transfer of America's manufacturing base, along with millions of jobs to China, Mexico, India, and other countries. Your tax dollars and mine have been used and are being used now to deindustrialize our economy and to drive us toward third world status. Here are a few examples from different job sectors, different regions of the country that illustrate what is happening. This is a front page story from February 5 of this year. The big front page headline reads, "Goodbye Geneva." Now, does anyone know what the headline is referring to? I'll give you a clue. It's not about some tourist bidding farewell to Geneva, Switzerland. It's about the Geneva Steel Plant in Vineyard, Utah, one of our last remaining large steel plants in this country. It's bidding farewell to the USA. Our country, once the largest steel producer in the world, now produces very little steel. In fact, over the past year, many of our manufacturers have found it almost impossible to buy all kinds of steel, even sheet metal, nuts and bolts, nails, and other fasteners. We've never faced this before in modern times. The subtitle below the aerial view of the photo says, "Chinese firm gets okay to buy assets." Let me just read the first couple paragraphs of that. Quote, "A federal bankruptcy judge sealed Geneva Steel's fate Wednesday, approving a $40 million sale of its core assets to a Chinese company. The sale to Qingdao Iron and Steel Company Group is the beginning and end of one of Utah's largest bankruptcy cases and prepares the way for Geneva's equipment to be dismantled and shipped to the Chinese coastal province of Shandong." What we see here is, again, a familiar story, the transfer of major U.S. industries to overseas, in this case to communist China. Another example, last August, the Pilotex towel factory in Kannapolis, North Carolina, laid off nearly 6,500 employees. The company was overwhelmed and undercut by a flood of cheaper imports from China. 6,500 jobs gone overnight. Thousands of households suddenly without the means of support. Another example, last summer the Hooker Furniture Corporation closed 10 of its plants, laying off a couple thousand workers. Again, China and other overseas competitors have taken their market. Maytag Corporation is in the process of closing its appliance factory in Galesburg, Illinois, and moving to Mexico. 1,600 workers are losing their jobs. Another example here is from the Wall Street Journal. The title is "Blueprint for Outsourcing." I had it put onto a slide here, the main photographs from it. What you see here is the massive new Salt Lake City library under construction. Incredibly, all of these enormous concrete structural pieces were precast in Mexico and transported nearly 2,500 miles to Salt Lake City. Because of our super-regulated business climate, it's more cost-effective to outsource even huge construction jobs like this overseas and then transport them at immense cost over these distances. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of tons of concrete and steel. Now, something is terribly wrong when this happens. Alarm bells should be ringing. These anecdotes can be multiplied hundreds of times, even thousands of times, whether it's the East Coast, the West Coast, the Gulf Coast, Midwest, Southwest, or Rocky Mountain states. The story's much the same. The U.S. economy has lost 3 million jobs since January 2001, when President Bush came into office. 2.5 million of those were manufacturing jobs, the hardest hit sector of our economy. Now, before Bush supporters in the audience get the idea that this is a bash Bush event, or that I'm yearning for a return to the Clinton presidency, or that I am a shill for the Kerry or Edwards campaigns, Let me stipulate that there is equal blame for both Republicans and Democrats for our current downward spiral. This mad race to the bottom has been a bipartisan affair, as I will elucidate further on. But according to the Bush administration itself, and according to the Federal Reserve Chairman, Alan Greenspan, and to establishment economists, our economy, they say, is in recovery mode and has been recovering since the 2001 recession. Are we really? Are we in recovery? Well, here are some unvarnished facts. We lost 1,321,000 manufacturing jobs during our supposed 25 months of recovery, going up to January of this year. The administration points to a small gain in mostly low-pay, non-tradable service jobs, flipping burgers, stocking shelves at Costco, or greeting customers at Walmart. But these are not replacements for the kind of high-paying manufacturing jobs, productive jobs that we've been using. Now, we've had this net loss of 910,000 jobs, almost 1 million jobs, in spite of expansionary fiscal and monetary policy of unprecedented magnitude. That is, in spite of record annual deficits of over $500 billion, in spite of repeated interest rate reductions to almost zero, in spite of housing construction boom and the refinancing boom caused by these record low interest rates, in spite of unprecedented 2-year, 4-year, and 6-year no-interest auto loans and generous rebates. In other words, in spite of all these extraordinary government measures to pump up the economy and to give a false appearance of prosperity, we still lost close to 1 million jobs. This is unprecedented, and it is not a good sign. But that does not begin to tell the whole story. We've looked mainly at the exporting of blue-collar manufacturing jobs overseas, which has been where the main job exodus has been occurring for 2 decades. Now, however, white-collar jobs have taken off in huge numbers, led by the massive migration of telephone customer service jobs, mostly to India. As this New York Times article from May 11th points out, it's headlined, "More Can I Help You jobs migrate from U.S. to India." The young lady who you see here in the telephone headset is Manisha Martin. She is an Indian, and she is taking calls at a mammoth telephone service center in Bombay, India. Where are all the calls coming from that she answers? They're coming from welfare recipients in the U.S. Yes, many state governments have outsourced these call services overseas. They are spending tens of millions of taxpayer dollars to outsource these service jobs to the other side of the planet, usually to India. Of course, many major corporations are doing the same thing. So when you call the 800 number for your bank, for instance, or your credit card, or a major airline, or for the customer service department of your car manufacturer or appliance or electronics manufacturer, chances are you are going to be talking to someone in India. But it's just not lowly telephone service jobs that have been leaving the U.S. in droves, although that has been the biggest outflow and has received the most media attention. We are also seeing high-paying, high-tech knowledge jobs, the ones that we were told would replace the vanishing blue-collar jobs, now on the chopping block. Accounting, payroll processing, tax return preparation, computer design, software design, architectural design, engineering, stock market analysis, medical transcription, insurance processing, X-ray, CAT scan reading, graphic arts, and much, much, much more are being moved overseas in a very big way. There's an often cited study by Forrester Research Incorporated which said, quote, "You will see an explosion of work going overseas," end quote. The Forrester study has famously predicted that at least 3.3 million of these white-collar jobs and $136 billion in wages will shift from the U.S. to low-cost countries by 2015. However, an October 2003 report by researchers from the University of California, Berkeley's Fisher Center for Real Estate and Urban Economics suggests that this Forrester prediction may be extremely conservative. According to the Berkeley researchers, as many as 14 million jobs are at risk of outsourcing, not 3.3 million. The authors of the Berkeley Report note that, quote, the recent boom in outsourcing is causing growing apprehension in the U.S. that this may well be the largest out-migration of non-manufacturing jobs in the history of the U.S. economy, end quote. This is a massive shift that bespeaks far more than the number of jobs and billions of dollars on the bottom line. It concerns the critical competitive edge that the U.S. has enjoyed due to our innovation and technological leadership. That competitive edge is disappearing. It is being given away to our competitors and even to our avowed enemies. This is an amazing story, cover story from Business Week, February 3rd of last year. Ran under the alarming headline, "Is Your Job Next?" This is followed, as you can see, by a long cover subtitle which reads, quote, "The next round of globalization is sending upscale jobs offshore. They include basic research, chip design, engineering, even financial analysis. Can America lose these jobs and still prosper?" End quote. Now, the very obvious answer to Business Week's question is a resounding no. These high-tech jobs are not luxuries that we can allow to be nonchalantly discarded. They are critically important, as are many of the so-called low-tech jobs exported to foreign lands in recent years. Manufacturing does matter. Let me say that again. Manufacturing does matter. It is essential to a strong national economy, especially for a world power like the United States, especially one like us with sizable defense imperatives. We will have little hope of prosperity if we allow our nation to depend on competitors or outright adversaries for basic parts, supplies, technologies, and resources. America needs a solid base of these old, dirty industries such as mining, metallurgy, oil, coal, timber, steel, agriculture, and manufacturing, not just for prosperity, but for basic survival. All of our high-tech advantages on the virtual battlefield will quickly prove to be a hollow reed if we do not have the means to produce arms, munitions, equipment, transportation, food, and clothing for our forces on the real battlefields of the world. Incredibly, Business Week answers its own question by suggesting that the predicted high-tech job hemorrhage, already underway, actually will benefit the U.S. That's what it says. It says, quote, "By spurring economic development in nations such as India, U.S. companies will have bigger foreign markets for their goods and services." How so? Have you heard that argument before? You know, we're going to be building more markets overseas. Those same promises were made regarding low-tech jobs for the quote-unquote China market. But we have found after 3 decades of spurring economic development in China that the PRC, the People's Republic of China, allows few of our products to reach Chinese markets. Each month, China erodes more and more of our economic infrastructure and job base with cheap goods produced by slave labor and new factories subsidized by loans, credits, and guarantees from the U.S. government, from the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund. As Business Week notes, quote, "Intel Incorporated and Texas Instruments Incorporated are furiously hiring Indian and Chinese engineers," end quote, as are many other U.S. companies. According to that magazine voice of the establishment corporate community, this trend, continued outsourcing, should not alarm us since, quote, "A case can be made that the U.S. will see a net gain from this shift, as with previous waves of globalization," end quote. According to Business Week, there is an engineering shortage in the U.S., which necessitates importing foreign engineers. The fact is, with the downsizing of the U.S. military and layoffs from the defense contractors and aerospace industries, there is a huge domestic surplus of qualified engineers, programmers, and other technical specialists to supply corporate America's needs, but not at the third world wages sought by the corporate one world elite. So the corporate lobbyists prevailed on Congress and President George Bush Sr. to pass legislation back in 1990 creating the special H-1B visa program, allowing a flood of alien high-tech workers into the U.S. According to figures compiled by eWeek, The number of H-1B visas granted annually hit an all-time high of 355,605 in the year 2000. That's 365,000, over a third of a million in just that 1 year. The H-1B visa program has already handed between 800,000 and 1 million high-tech jobs to these foreign workers, many of whom are far less qualified than American engineers, programmers, and technicians, who are forced now to take lower-paying positions here in their own country. But the H-1B visa is just one of the visa categories allowing a flood of foreign workers into the country to take U.S. jobs. There are also the H-2A, the H-2B, the J-1, the L-1, and TN visas. Between 1985 and 2002, U.S. employers applied for and received over 17 million of these visas. And we don't know how many of these aliens are still here. Now, we could go into much more detail about this, as we have in articles in the New American. This shows a few of the cover stories that we've done on this. These articles are available online at thenewamerican.com or at our new website, stoptheftaa.org. I will be explaining in just a moment what the FTAA, or Free Trade Area of the Americas, is and how it relates to this whole picture. But let me draw back for a moment to another amazing assertion by Businessweek. Same article. Businessweek said, quote, "By sending routine service and engineering tasks to nations with a surplus of educated workers, the U.S. labor force and capital can be redeployed to higher value industries and cutting edge R&D," that's research and development, end quote. We hear variations on this theme all the time. Here, for instance, is an article from February 21st, Associated Press story, showing Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan. Perhaps you saw Mr. Greenspan, as I did recently. The story comes from when he testified. It was on C-SPAN, testifying before Congress. As usual, most of the members of Congress genuflected before this hallowed oracle and told him how honored they were to be in his presence. However, a few members did shake off the hypnotic trance and press Mr. Greenspan with some pointed, even heated questioning about the continued loss of U.S. jobs. But the inflappable Fed chairman assured them, as you can see here in the blow-up quote, he said, "We have reason to be confident that new jobs will displace old ones, as they always have," end quote. That is the same bilge that he has been dispensing for years, even as jobs have continued to hemorrhage at unprecedented rates. This is the same line dispensed by President Bush's top economist, Georgie Mankiw, who said that the massive outsourcing of U.S. jobs, quote, "is probably a plus for the economy in the long run," end quote. This is standard dogma recited almost as a mantra and retailed regularly by the Wall Street Journal and other major media organs, by Rush Limbaugh and all of his imitators. This is incredible. We are witnessing the wholesale strip mining of our industrial and technology base, the giveaway of our technological lead, the destruction of the American middle class. Yet all of these spouting mouths say that this is wonderful, that this is actually going to benefit us. Over and over again, they soothe the American people. Don't worry. We're keeping the best jobs here. We're only sending the low-tech jobs over here, they say, overseas, they say. So we'll be more efficient, we'll be able to produce more, we'll be more productive as we concentrate on the cutting edge. Quite simply, that is a lie. Dell Computers has built a sparkling new China design center in Shanghai. This joins similar research and design centers in China, Russia, and India built by Microsoft, Motorola, Boeing, General Electric, and all of the other major corporate titans. After years of strip mining America's industrial base, U.S. corporate elitists and their political allies in Washington, in Beijing, Mexico, Moscow, and elsewhere are now terminating upscale U.S. white-collar jobs as well. Why should we be surprised? The Bush Senior administration and the Clinton administration that followed it pushed aggressively for more outsourcing and more immigration and more H-1B type visa expansion. They pushed NAFTA and the WTO, the World Trade Organization, NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Association, as well as other so-called free trade agreements. The current Bush Jr. administration is continuing the same program and has been attempting even to accelerate it even more. As everyone now knows, President Bush has proposed a radical amnesty plan that would give legal status to millions of illegal aliens now in the United States. That could mean legalizing as many as 15 million aliens. You see here President Bush with President Vicente Fox of Mexico, his co-conspirator in this undertaking. This is a special focus that we did on that issue in the New American. This is the Amnesty and Betrayal. This is February 9 of 2004. We brought out this issue right after President Bush formally announced his plan on January 7th at a White House address and a January 12 press conference in Monterrey, Mexico with President Vicente Fox. Many Republicans were shocked. Now, those of you who read the New American were not surprised because we had been reporting repeatedly over the last 3 years of all of the signals coming from the Bush administration and from President Bush himself pointing exactly to this. So go to our website, thenewamerican.com, and see. The articles are there. We're not psychic. The facts and signs were all there for anyone who is willing to see, for anyone who is willing to face reality. We simply reported those facts and signs. Even more incredible is the President's position, as announced, for instance, at his press conference of December 15th, during which he declared, quote, "I have constantly said that we need to have an immigration policy that helps match any willing employer to any willing employee," end quote. The President has indeed repeatedly expressed this policy position, and he's done everything possible to implement it. But what does it mean? Well, think about this. There are literally hundreds of millions of quote-unquote willing employees throughout the world who would gladly rush here to work for a fraction of what American employees are paid. Willing employees matched with willing employers. We see what this means in the Singapore Free Trade Agreement and the Chile Free Trade Agreement, both pushed through Congress last year by the Bush administration. These agreements have hidden trapdoor clauses that allow these countries to send their nationals here without, quote-unquote, numerical restriction, which means an unlimited number. Similar traps await us with the Central American Free Trade Agreement, or CAFTA, which would expand NAFTA to all of Central America, or the FTAA, the Free Trade Area of the Americas, which would expand NAFTA to the entire hemisphere, all 34 nations. Have you contacted your senators and representatives about these? It's an election year. Now is a very good time to contact them. They're very sensitive to this issue now because they've been feeling the backlash from many quarters. Many of them have backed off from earlier stances of support for these trade agreements and the amnesty immigration proposals. And they've done this because of public outcry. If you add your voice to the chorus now, you just may make the difference in stopping these dangerous programs. I was down in Miami in November at the big FTAA Summit of the Americas. Political and business leaders from all of the countries of the Western Hemisphere were there. Most of the big businesses there were retailing the U.S. Commerce Department and Treasury Department line that we must push forward with the adoption of the Free Trade Area of the Americas this year. The FTAA, they claim, will usher in benefits to all as a new wave of prosperity is inaugurated due, they say, to the free flow of goods, services, people, and capital, and as borders become less and less relevant and ultimately disappear. So that we ultimately will have just one hemispheric superstate, like the European Union, from Alaska to Tierra del Fuego. These same business, financial, and political elites tell us that this is all the inevitable, unstoppable process of globalization. This is free trade and free market capitalism at work, they say. The market process is often messy, they tell us, but it finds the most efficient means of production and the lowest costs. And even if it sometimes causes dislocations and local hardships, we all just need to readjust constantly, improve our own efforts to stay competitive. And in the long run, everyone will be better off, things will smooth out, and prosperity will be experienced by all. Now, on the surface, this line seems to have some merit. However, there are some major flaws and fallacies inherent in these arguments. As we already mentioned earlier, the artificial prosperity we have been experiencing is exactly that, artificial. We are running annual fiscal deficits of $500 billion plus, which is another way of saying we are having our government spend $500 billion more each year than we are willing to pay for with taxes. So, how are we paying for all of that government spending? By government borrowing. Borrowing from whom? From private foreign investors and foreign central banks, principally. Foreign investors, both individual and institutional, and foreign governments have been buying hundreds of billions of dollars of our bonds, our debt. But as many economic experts have been pointing out, if foreign investors flee the U.S. market, we will be thrown into a deep recession, and very quickly. Now, at the same time that we are putting our necks into this government spending noose with $550 billion fiscal deficits, we are also running $500 billion trade deficits annually, which means we are buying $500 billion more in consumer products from foreign services, from foreign sources, than we are selling to them. This is not sustainable. How have we done this so far? Well, by going further and further into debt, individually and nationally. In the past 5 years, the American consumer has increased his indebtedness by 58%, piling up debt as never before. This has been possible because the Federal Reserve has kept interest rates at historic lows, fueling an escalating borrowing and spending binge. Housing prices accordingly have skyrocketed, providing huge paper home equity gains that have been used to buy and spend more and more and more. These twin trade and fiscal deficits will end up destroying our economy and our country if this madness continues. Let's look at some fundamentals underpinning the misnamed free trade philosophy of our government policymakers and the ongoing wave of globalization. These are fundamentals that are being denied and ignored. First, it is crucial for us to understand that contrary to what we so often hear, what we are experiencing under the rubric of globalization and free trade is definitely not the free market at work. What we are seeing, in fact, is what is referred to in law and economics as moral hazard, and on a colossal scale never dreamed of before. Now, if you're not familiar with the term moral hazard, it is a name given to the tendency of insurance or government policies to change behavior by removing risk or even rewarding risk and bad behavior. For instance, when insurance companies do not properly balance risks and benefits with respect to what they charge for policy premiums and what they pay out in claims, they may find that they are actually encouraging arson and auto accidents, for instance. How? Well, the insurance payoffs make it profitable and relatively risk-free for customers to be negligent or even to engage in criminal activity. Likewise, when government unemployment benefits, welfare benefits, or aid to unmarried mothers, for instance, are instituted. These government programs are notorious for encouraging many people to refuse to work, to live on government dole, or to have huge broods of illegitimate children. These are well-known cases of moral hazard. In our case of moral hazard and trade, we see U.S. companies and banks engaging in transactions that they would never do if they had to bear the risk associated with them. In a free market setting, they could never get away with putting their investors' capital into multi-billion-dollar projects in unstable third world countries or totalitarian communist countries. Why is that? Because of the risk of instability, of crime, war, and revolution, or the possibility that the government itself may expropriate or nationalize the company's assets. The market, i.e. investors, take these things into consideration and put a high cost on premiums of these risk factors. In many cases, that risk premium is just too high. It's prohibitive. So the market forces dictate that the production facility remain here and those investments are never made overseas. But with U.S. government agencies and UN institutions guaranteeing these projects, the investor's risk is removed. If these projects are destroyed by riots or revolution or are nationalized, the U.S. taxpayer picks up the tab. So how does this work? Well, we see here in our case of moral hazard that we have U.S. government agencies like the Export-Import Bank, the Ex-Im Bank, or the OPIC, that's the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, or UN agencies, international agencies like the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, or the Asian Development Bank, for instance, give taxpayer dollars to companies to move their operations to foreign countries. The communist second world and socialist third world countries have always enjoyed a huge advantage over us in terms of access to unlimited pools of cheap labor, even slave labor. However, we have had a much greater advantage that has offset that due to our far higher efficiency and productivity resulting from private capital, private initiative, and minimal interference by the state in the market. This has provided immense incentives and rewards that have promoted investment, research, and inventions that produced incredible breakthroughs in technology and know-how. This dynamism of the free enterprise system guaranteed constant improvement, whereas the bureaucratic oppression of the collectivist states guaranteed that they would always lag far behind us. But we can never compete with these countries that have an unlimited supply of cheap labor if we continue to provide them with all of our latest technology and unlimited capital. Yet that is what we are doing. We are continuing to finance our own destruction by allowing our tax dollars to fund the transfer of production facilities through the Ex-Im Bank, OPIC, the IMF, World Bank, etc. We also will continue to lose our jobs and our industrial base if we continue to shackle our own producers here at home with socialistic controls and taxes that drive up our costs and price our products off the market. Yet, that is what we are doing also. This is another very critical part of the job loss equation. The American producers, the manufacturers, the farmers, the ranchers, the oil drillers, the software designers, textile mills, lumber mills, steel mills, cannot stay here and provide jobs when government mandates, regulations, and taxation are killing them. U.S. regulatory costs, especially from regulations allegedly aimed at environmental and safety risks, are particularly hazardous to small and medium businesses. The true extent of that hazard is amply exposed in an important study released in December of 2003 by the National Association of Manufacturers. This is the study. It's got a long title, How Structural Costs Imposed on U.S. Manufacturers Harm Workers and Threaten Competitiveness. This comprehensive study significantly noted that, quote, compliance costs for regulations can be regarded as the silent killer of manufacturing competitiveness, end quote. The report revealed that the regulatory tax and mandate burden is adding at least a staggering 22.4%, nearly $5 per hour worked, to the cost of doing business in the U.S. relative to our major foreign competitors. NAM President Jerry Jasanowski noted that the NAM study documents, quote, that we are essentially shooting ourselves in the foot competitively by making it too expensive to make products in America, end quote. What's more, the regulatory agencies have negated many of the impressive gains in production efficiency by U.S. industry over the past decades. Quote, taken together, says Jasanowski, the external non-production costs have offset a large part of the 54% increase in productivity achieved since 1990, end quote. Now, let me just summarize what that means. What he was pointing out was that American business has achieved an enormous increase in productivity of 54% by investing billions and billions of dollars in upgrading and computerizing and increasing our technological output. And yet all of that has been wiped out. All of that investment, all of those advantages, all of that productivity gain has been wiped out by government regulation. The NAM study showed that American businesses could compete successfully in the global marketplace. We're often told that they can't, but they can, if they are relieved of the onerous burdens placed on them by the federal regulatory leviathan in Washington. This should have been ongoing headline news for weeks, but it wasn't. In fact, it was buried by the U.S. media. We need to realize that every time we allow our elected or appointed officials to shut down our oil and gas exploration on the basis of phony environmental claims that it will destroy the natural habitat of some so-called endangered species or bring on global warming, that we are driving up the cost of energy and killing American jobs. Every time that we allow our government to mandate to businesses that they must provide paid family leave, maternal leave, medical insurance, or benefits to homosexual partners, for instance, every time we allow that, we are sending jobs offshore. Every time we allow OSHA or EPA or other agencies to saddle business with massive, expensive, time-consuming, contradictory regulations, we are telling businessmen and investors, we don't want your jobs. Move to China, move to Indonesia or Mexico. On January 28th, I witnessed a very sad and disturbing event, one which has taken place in similar venues all across America. I was at the auction of the Wetzel Oviatt Lumber Company in El Dorado Hills, California. The man you see here is Cecil Wetzel. He's the former owner of the company, founded by his father in 1929. I watched as logging trucks, forklifts, and other equipment were auctioned off. This is one of the last privately owned lumber mills in California. You can see the signs there for the lumber sign there, the equipment being sold off. This mill provided jobs for hundreds of Americans and provided much-needed lumber and wood products to American consumers. But incredible environmental regulations, combined with exorbitant workmen's compensation mandates by the government and trade policies that have flooded the U.S. market with lumber from Canada, New Zealand, Brazil, Red China, and elsewhere, forced him out of business. Going, going, gone. That was the auctioneer's song, and that has been the familiar refrain concerning all of America's businesses and jobs for too long. But as I mentioned before, it's not only our jobs and businesses that are disappearing, but our country itself, the United States of America, that is in danger of disappearing. Many of our elected and appointed officials have completely bought into globalism and a pervasive, subversive idea among our political and economic elites that the nation state is finished. They believe that the United States must integrate, converge, and merge with other countries. Now, if you're not familiar with this thesis, you haven't been reading the Wall Street Journal and other major organs that constitute the opinion-forming vehicles of our governing elite. You may not recognize this man, but he has been one of the most important individuals in propagandizing for the destructive policies we've been examining here. His name is Robert Bartley, and he just passed away this past December 10th. NAFTA, WTO, CAFTA, the FTAA, the 1986 Alien Amnesty, and the Republican Party's embrace of all of these dangerous programs owe their success, in large measure, to him. So, who is Robert Bartley? Well, for nearly 30 years, he was the editor of the Wall Street Journal, which he wielded as a formidable weapon for internationalism. He was all the more effective in this effort because he presented himself falsely as a conservative and as a free market advocate. The liberal left network media and his fellow internationalists at the New York Times, the Washington Post, etc., helped him carry on this charade. In an editorial for the July 2nd, 2001 issue of the Wall Street Journal, entitled Open NAFTA Borders, Why Not?, Bartley announced the journal's support for dumping U.S. sovereignty and transforming the United States into a vassal of a hemispheric superstate modeled after the European Union. In fact, Bartley praised Mexican President Vicente Fox for proposing exactly that. In his editorial, Bartley said, quote, "Indeed, during the immigration debate of 1984, we suggested an ultimate goal to guide passing policies, a constitutional amendment which would say, quote, there shall be open borders, unquote." This is astounding. Mr. Bartley was actually bragging that he and the Journal, that supposed bastion of conservatism, were pushing for demolishing our borders and our national sovereignty 20 years ago. Mr. Bartley once said, quote, "The nation state is finished. I think Kenichi Ome is right." Now that statement speaks volumes if you know who Kenichi Ome is. But probably not 1 in 100 Americans, maybe 1 in 1,000, have ever heard of him. Unfortunately, most of the tiny minority who have heard of him and read his books belong to the same club of one-world globalists that Robert Bartley belonged to. This slide here shows Kenichi Ome and one of his many books, The End of the Nation State. He's written many influential books. He's also written some very important essays. This is one here entitled The Rise of the Region State. In that, Mr. Ome declares in his opening sentence, "The nation state has become an unnatural, even dysfunctional unit for organizing human activity and managing economic endeavor in a borderless world." End quote. Now, that's just the beginning. It is a full-thrust argument for the formal end of nationhood for the United States and our merger into a regional community for the hemisphere, patterned after the European Union. Now, most Americans have never seen or heard of Foreign Affairs, where this article appeared. Why then is this article significant? Well, Time magazine calls this journal, quote, "the most influential periodical in print," end quote. And they do so for good reason. It is so influential because it is the House Journal of the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR, which some of its members have boasted is the real ruling power behind our country, behind the scenes. What you see here is the Council on Foreign Relations annual report. The CFR's 4,000 members wield an enormous power vastly disproportionate to their organization's size because they control so many leveraged positions in both the Democrat and Republican parties, in the Congress, in the White House, the media, Wall Street, leading think tanks, and universities. The inset photo you see here is from page 12 of the 2003 report. The individuals shown here are at the first hemispheric meeting of the Councils on Foreign Relations of the Americas. This was held in Buenos Aires, Argentina on March 30th and 31st of 2003. The men and women shown here are top Latin American leaders. They are the key individuals who have been instrumental in getting their governments to line up behind the FTAA to support this move for merger of the hemisphere. Robert Bartley was a member of the CFR, as well as a member of the CFR's sister One World organization, the Trilateral Commission. He was also an attendee of the super-secretive Bilderberger meetings. These are the premier organizations that have been undermining American sovereignty and promoting world government for many decades. Presiding as the eminence grise over this global hemispheric subversion for the past several decades is David Rockefeller, former chairman of the Chase Manhattan Bank, former chairman of the CFR, founding chairman of the Council of the Trilateral Commission, and original founding member of the Bilderberg Group. The Rockefeller Center, together with Harvard University Press, recently published this ponderous but very important tome, Integrating the Americas. It is a collection of essays by globalists laying out in detail their plans for merging the nations of North and South America into a regional superstate, patterned after the European Union. David Rockefeller, who is now 89 years old, is the last surviving member of the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR study group back at the end of World War II that drew up the Marshall Plan and the scheme for the European Common Market. Originally, the Common Market was sold to the European people as merely a trade agreement, not as something that would destroy their national sovereignty and merge them into a centralized socialist government. But that is what has happened, and that is what was planned from the very beginning. I believe it's worth noting that something here on the cover of the book, Integrating the Americans, gives us a clue as to where we're going with this. The artwork you see here is taken from a mural entitled Pan-American Unity, painted back in the 1940s by the famous Mexican painter Diego Rivera, who is shown here in one of his self-portraits. Comrade Rivera was a notorious, militant, outspoken communist who used his murals as communist propaganda, glorifying Marx, Lenin, Stalin, Mao Zedong, and other communist mass murderers. From the 1930s onward, the Rockefellers were some of Diego Rivera's most enthusiastic financial supporters. They commissioned him to do a number of murals. It is significant that David Rockefeller has chosen Rivera's communist vision of unity for the Americas to symbolize his, that is David Rockefeller's, vision of unity for the hemisphere under the FTAA. There are many other examples that we could show, but allow me to offer just one more, the recent book by L. Ronald Sheeman entitled Greater America. The subtitle is A New Partnership for the Americas in the 21st Century. Mr. Sheeman, a longtime top functionary of the Inter-American Development Bank, that was one of the institutions that I showed you in the moral hazard slide. It's part of the whole United Nations system. Mr. Sheeman, the author of the book, is former head of the IDB and a CFR One World Factotum. In there, he delineates the plans to merge the hemisphere, including the merging of our currencies, as was done via the euro currency in the countries of Europe. So where does this lead us? The question before us as citizens of the United States of America is this: are we going to stop this mad rush to national extinction? Are we going to stop this betrayal of our country, of our Constitution, our independence, and our sovereignty? Are we going to save our country and our legacy of liberty and prosperity from decline to third world status? Can it be stopped? Can it be saved? Yes, it can be stopped. Yes, we can save our country, ourselves, and our families from this fate. But will we? That's the question. That's up to us, to you, to me, to all of us here. We definitely won't succeed if we don't all get involved and get informed and get active to stop and reverse these destructive policies and trends. NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, has already done tremendous damage to our economy, to our jobs, to our farms, to our businesses, to our freedom, to our independence, and to our constitutional system of governance. Right now, the battle is on to stop the expansion of NAFTA by stopping the adoption of CAFTA, the Central American Free Trade Agreement, which would expand NAFTA to all of Central America, and the FTAA, which would expand it throughout the entire hemisphere. These can be defeated. They must be defeated. Not only would CAFTA and the FTAA greatly spur a massive migration from Latin America to the U.S., it would also accelerate the process of outsourcing and offshoring of U.S. businesses and jobs to Latin America. We have examined all of these things in great detail in the New American and in other analyses, all of which can be found at our new website, www.stoptheftaa.org. So, what specifically, in practical terms, can you and I do right now in the days and weeks and months ahead? Some very important things. There are many things that we can do. One, you can start immediately, tomorrow, or better yet today, tonight, when you get home. Contact your senators and congressmen to emphatically urge them to vote against both CAFTA and the FTAA and all the other many bilateral and multilateral free trade agreements that the administration has lined up. Now, how can you do this immediately, today or tonight? When you get home, go onto the internet. How many of you are hooked up to the internet? Everybody hooked up? Okay, you go to the internet and go to our website. And when you get to stoptheftaa.org, click on our Contact Your Congressman button, and it will show you how to send an email right away. It also provides you with their telephone numbers and their mailing addresses. So 2, let your representative and senators know that you are adamantly opposed to any form of amnesty for illegal aliens and any increase in immigration quotas or worker visas. In fact, all of these areas must be scaled back until we get control over our borders. Let them know that their responses and their action on this will be very important this fall when you cast your vote. We have 2 very recent video DVD presentations, half-hour each, on the FTAA. This one focusing on the immigration issue, this one focusing on trade policies. So you can help get the information out that we've been talking about here tonight to your friends, to your relatives, to your business associates. If you don't already have one, pick up here tonight or order a Activate Congress to Stop the FTAA packet. This is filled with important information, reprints, brochures, a button such as I have here, CD that you can use to inform your neighbors, little handout cards. All of this information is indispensable for getting this information out to our fellow citizens. Buy and distribute copies of this excellent book, America's Engineered Decline, by my colleague at the New American, senior editor William Norman Grigg. He has put here in very concise form much of the important information about all of the key issues that we've been discussing here tonight. These are just a few of the concrete things that you can do to help reverse this. We can and must stop the ongoing deindustrialization of America. We can and must stop America's decline toward third world status. We can and must defeat these plans for political and economic merger and the destruction of our borders and national sovereignty. We can do all of this, but only if we are willing to look squarely at the facts, only if we're willing to face the truth, only if we're willing to speak the truth, only if we're willing to spread the truth, and only if we're willing to fight for the truth. The members and local chapters of the John Birch Society, which sponsored this event, are willing to do all of that. Come join us in the freedom fight. Thank you for your attendance and for your kind attention. Thank you.